Imagine you are standing beside the Nile more than 4,000 years ago. The air is heavy with incense. Stone temples rise like mountains, carved with gods who stare back without mercy. This is ancient Egypt, a civilization we're taught to admire, but rarely taught to understand. Because behind the gold, behind the pyramids, behind the divine kings, there was a system built on absolute control. In ancient Egypt, the body was not private. It was political, religious, cosmic. Every human form was believed to be connected to the balance of the universe itself. Order, what the Egyptians called ma'at, depended on obedience, ritual, and sacrifice. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler. He was a living bridge between humans and gods. His health, his rituals, even his physical form were believed to influence the flooding of the Nile, the fertility of the land, and the survival of the kingdom. That belief created fear, because when crops failed, when floods didn't come, when enemies advanced, the question was never, why did nature change? The question was, who failed the gods? Religion in Egypt was not about comfort. It was about responsibility and punishment. Temples did not exist only for worship. They were centers of authority, record-keeping, medicine, and discipline. Priests were not passive servants of faith. They were managers of cosmic order. And the human body was one of their tools. Modern archaeology has revealed that ancient Egyptians treated the body, living and dead, with intense ritual precision. Mummification itself was not preservation for memory. It was preparation for eternal service. The body was modified, arranged, sealed, and symbolically transformed to function correctly in the afterlife. But some discoveries troubled early researchers. As scientific examinations improved in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists began noticing irregularities in elite burials. Certain royal mummies showed signs of deliberate physical alteration that did not match modern expectations of reverence or respect. Instead of publishing these findings openly, many scholars stayed silent. Why? Because Victorian society could not accept the idea that one of history's greatest civilizations operated under rules so different, and sometimes so disturbing, from modern moral frameworks. Rather than challenge public imagination, evidence was hidden. Artifacts were labeled incorrectly. Storage rooms were restricted. Translations were softened. Entire passages of ancient texts were removed or replaced with vague language. This wasn't ancient censorship. It was modern shame. Ancient Egyptian religion viewed human energy, physical, emotional, and symbolic, as fuel for the universe. Rituals were designed to redirect that energy toward the gods. The line between devotion and control was thin, and it often disappeared entirely. Those born into elite families lived under enormous pressure. Nobility was not privilege alone, it was obligation. To fail religious expectations was to endanger the entire society. Children raised in temples were not educated for freedom. They were trained for function. Identity was secondary to purpose. Individual will meant nothing compared to divine order. Ancient records describe strict bodily discipline, endurance training, and ritual isolation, all framed as sacred preparation. To modern readers, these descriptions feel unsettling. But within Egyptian belief systems, they were considered necessary. When disasters struck, rituals intensified. Festivals meant to renew cosmic balance grew larger, louder, and more extreme over time. Alcohol, music, exhaustion, and emotional release were used to dissolve social boundaries temporarily. These events were believed to allow gods to enter the human world. For a short time each year, order collapsed by design. Authority figures lost control. Social hierarchies inverted. Normal rules were suspended. What followed was chaos disguised as devotion. Ancient writers hint at violence, injury, and psychological damage resulting from these events, though rarely in direct language. The tone is careful, controlled, because even then, some truths were dangerous to record plainly. Foreign visitors were shocked. Accounts from neighboring civilizations describe Egyptian festivals as frightening, unpredictable, and overwhelming. Some states refused diplomatic contact during these periods altogether. Yet within Egypt, criticism was forbidden. To question religious practice was to question the gods themselves. As centuries passed, the system began to crack. Greek rulers during the Ptolemaic era attempted to rationalize Egyptian religion, blending it with Mediterranean philosophy. The result was tension between reason and ritual, control and belief. Roman conquest finally broke the system. Roman authorities viewed many Egyptian practices as dangerous, destabilizing, and morally unacceptable. Temples were closed. Priests were stripped of power. Ritual spaces were destroyed or repurposed. But the Romans didn't just suppress practices. They erased memory. Texts were burned. Artwork destroyed. Architecture altered. What survived was fragmented and filtered again centuries later by Victorian scholars who preferred myths to discomfort. That double erasure shaped everything we think we know today. Museums show beauty. Textbooks show order. Documentaries show mystery. But rarely do they show control. Rarely do they show how belief can justify suffering. Not because people are evil, but because systems are powerful. Ancient Egypt was not uniquely cruel. It was human, intensely human, capable of brilliance and brutality at the same time. Understanding that does not dishonor the past. It makes it honest. History is not meant to reassure us. It is meant to warn us. Because whenever power becomes sacred, whenever authority becomes divine, and whenever bodies become symbols instead of people, the past stops being ancient and starts repeating itself. What makes ancient Egypt truly unsettling isn't just what happened. It's how normal it all became. Over centuries, ritual control over the body stopped feeling extreme. It became routine. Generations were raised inside a system where obedience was sacred and suffering was reframed as duty. Ancient inscriptions show how language itself was used as a weapon. Pain became purification. Endurance became preparation. Silence became devotion. When people lacked the words to describe harm, the system protected itself. Psychologically, this shaped an entire civilization. Personal identity mattered less than cosmic function. Questioning authority wasn't rebellion, it was blasphemy. Fear of divine punishment was stronger than fear of death itself. This explains why resistance was rare. Not because people didn't suffer, but because suffering had meaning. When pain is explained as necessary, it becomes invisible. Modern historians now recognize this pattern across many ancient societies. Egypt wasn't an exception. It was an early example of how belief systems can reshape morality itself. And once morality is controlled, anything can be justified. So why does this matter today? Because the story of ancient Egypt isn't really about the past. It's about systems, about what happens when power becomes untouchable, when belief replaces accountability, when tradition overrides humanity. The most dangerous part wasn't the rituals. It wasn't the festivals. It wasn't even the suffering. It was the certainty. Certainty that the gods demanded it. Certainty that order required it. Certainty that questioning it would destroy the world. History shows us that civilizations don't collapse only from invasion or famine. They collapse when systems stop serving people and start consuming them. Ancient Egypt gave the world architecture, writing, medicine, and art that still inspire awe. But it also left behind warnings carved in stone and silence. Warnings about what happens when power hides behind divinity, when obedience becomes holiness, and when human bodies become tools instead of lives. If we only admire the monuments and ignore the systems behind them, we miss the lesson history is trying to teach us. Because the past doesn't repeat itself exactly. It evolves. And the line between devotion and destruction is thinner than we like to believe.